Welcome back to another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Chris Bedford, senior editor at the Federalist, joined here by my good friend and old boss, Neil Patel, publisher at the Daily Caller, president of the Daily Caller News Foundation. Neil, thanks for joining us.
Bedford, awesome to be with you, man.
It's 20 years. So 20 years ago this week, you were in a different place. You were not in media. You were a chief policy advisor to then Vice President Dick Cheney, who this was in the morning of 9/11. Started out as a normal day. You were expecting a child any day now, you and your wife, Amy, and suddenly everything changed very quickly. So just talking on the policy side, you had such an inside glimpse of that, being with the vice president when the news came down, or in very close proximity to him. Walk me through just on your side, the work kind of events and how that day changed so dramatically and what was going through your head.
Well, yeah, it's first of all, it's crazy to me that this was 20 years ago.
I know.
It seems like yesterday. And it's partly I'm getting old, but partly, it's just bizarre that 9/11 was a full 20 years ago. So, if you remember back to that period, Bush campaigned on all kinds of issues, not at all on terrorism or anything like it. So this is just an example of, we have these elections and we have all these plans, and then the world gets in the way and things happen. And no one saw 9/11 coming. There's all kinds of after action reports on whether we should have seen it coming or not. But I can tell you as a fact, no one saw it coming. And it was just not on our radar. But that day itself for me was completely surreal. I was not at the White House. So my first child was born on 9/10. So Columbia Women's Hospital was right down the street from the White House. It was actually on Pennsylvania Avenue. It's now condos. But right down the street from the White House, 9/10, my wife and I go to the hospital. She gives birth and we have our first child. So the morning of 9/11, I go out to get coffee from the hospital. The hospital had some crappy coffee. So there's a hotel next door. I was like, I'm going to go to the hotel and get us real coffees. And I walk into the hotel bar and I look up on the huge TV screens, and there's footage of the planes, the first plane crashing into the World Trade Center. And I was like, oh my God. And I'm telling you, man, as a life event, having your first child is pretty heavy. And when you just had your first child and your wife and your child are still in the hospital, and you see this country that felt so safe. I mean, nobody is coming to America to attack us. That was just something we all took for granted. I mean, all of us. I don't know anyone who didn't take that for granted. And all of a sudden you see your country under attack, and it happens to coincide with this life event of having your first child. It's freaking heavy. I just remember thinking whoa, what kind of world is my child coming into where America's no longer safe? So man, it was big. I wasn't at the White House because of that.
And was this the first plane or the second?
I'm pretty sure it was the first plane.
So you knew right away that this was. So I guess there's always some concern. People were kind of confused. Was this an attack? Is this an accident?
Yes, I guess. And going back, and again, it was a long time ago. That probably was my first thought. Was what's going on here? But certainly everything moved quickly, and by the time the second plane hit, we all knew it was an attack, and that's when all those feelings kicked in.
I remember being informed because somebody heard it on their tape. They had their Walkman and they had their headphones on, and they were outside having a cigarette or something, whatever we were doing in high school. And he said, "Oh, the DJ just said that the World Trade Center has been attacked by an airplane," and the teachers put him in detention because they thought he was trying to cause trouble. And we were trying to find a television. We found one in the closet and literally stuck a hanger into it to make it work. And the grainy images started to come through, and then they let him out. So when did you I guess you completed the coffee mission, got back to the hospital, started talking to your wife. When did you realize that, and when did she realize that you weren't going to be able to stay there?
So that was its own crazy thing. So, as things unfolded that day, as always happens, there are all these crazy rumors. And in DC, they were running hot and heavy. So first of all, there were all these unaccounted planes in the sky. And there were rumors that there were planes headed for all kinds of locations around DC and other places. There was a rumor that there was a plane headed to the State Department. There was a rumor that
it was coming to the Capitol.
There was a plane headed for the Capitol. There was a rumor that the mall was on fire and burning. And so I'm hearing stuff from friends at the White House who are literally running out of the building. I'm hearing from Tucker Carlson and I are old friends. So he and I were talking that day. He was at CNN at the time. And Tucker's always like on point for any rumor happening. So he's like, man, you better get out of there. Like the State Department's about to be attacked. So it was like we were trying to figure out what to do. And so I actually went to the doctor was in the room. This is a couple hours later. Doctor's in the room. And I said to the doctor, so how's the baby? And she said, baby's solid. Everything's great. And I said, and my wife, she's good too. And she said, yeah, your wife's great. Baby's great. I said, awesome. We're going home. And she said, you can't go home. And I was like,
why not?
You can't go home. And, they have these crazy rules at the hospitals, right? I think a lot of it's insurance and liability. Like, so for a baby, you have to stay for a couple nights, even if everything's fine. Like, you can't just leave the next day. And so I told her, look, the attack just happened. I don't know what else is coming, but there's all these crazy rumors. And your hospital happens to be located right on Pennsylvania Avenue, really close to the IMF World Bank building and the State Department. And given everything going on, I'd just be more comfortable at my house. So as long as everyone's healthy, we're out of here. And she tells me that I'm being hysterical. I tell her that you're not my mom and I don't need to listen to you. And the conversation kind of proceeds down this downward path until I look over and pretty soon, like we're kind of yelling at each other. I look over and my wife, just had a baby, is like sitting in the corner and like there are tears coming down her eyes. And I was like, oh God, I can't fight with this doctor anymore. It's going to my wife's just, this is not good. So I backed down. We stayed at the freaking hospital. And later I can't remember if it was that night or the next day, but I got a call from Scooter Libby, who is the vice president's chief of staff. And so I was one of the, few people. One of the issues early in the Bush administration was like, and it happens in every administration, is like, it takes a while to get people their security clearances. And
this was a new administration since January.
Yeah. So it would be like if it happened to Biden right now, right? Because it was a new administration. And so, and I bet you this is happening with Biden right now. I bet you there's a bunch of new people who came in from the private sector or academia, anyone from outside government. If you want your clearances, and I'm talking about the highest levels of clearances, it takes a while. Like, take those FBI checks. They do full field investigation. They go and interview everyone you've ever met. And so those take a while. I happen to have had my clearances coming in. I'd done some work on Capitol Hill on a investigative committee. We investigated the Clinton administration, and I was counsel for the committee. So to do that, and it was all in the national security area. It was about transferring missile technology to China. Actually, it's kind of crazy how little things change, because like that kind of debate is still happening now. But it was about the private sector, like transferring really sensitive missile technology to China, and these were companies that were really tied in with Clinton and had been Clinton donors. Whatever, that's all the background. But I had all my top level clearances to do that project. So I had already done some work in the national security area for Cheney, and Scooter Libby called me and said, look, this changes everything. It's going to change your role for a while. We need your help. And we've decided that the president and the vice president shouldn't be together. It's just not smart. There's always this fear in the U.S. government of decapitation event, right? So an adversary, all they got to do is hit the White House when they're both there, and there's a chance that we lose both the president and the vice president of the United States. That is something the government never wants to happen. So the main security protocol we put in place was those guys are not going to be together much. And Scooter said to me, we're going to be going away, and you just had a baby. So take a few days, take what you need, but I need you with us. I can say now because it's been disclosed later, but for a while it was always secret where we were going. We went all over the place, but the most common place we went was Camp David. So starting then, like a couple days later, my life consisted of Sunday evening going to the vice president's house and getting on a helicopter, flying to Camp David, and spending until pretty late Friday night at Camp David, working out of their facilities. And the goal was just to keep the two guys apart. So that was sort of, life-changing for me and for my wife, since we just had a brand new baby. But
it's not paternity leave.
What's that?
That's not paternity leave.
No, but you know what? I mean, you were in high school, so you may not have had this as much, but we all had this feeling of like you just wanted to do anything you can to help. Like your country just got attacked. I mean, so many guys went and just enlisted. I mean, it's like so many people just were trying to do whatever they could to help. So I was honored that I already had a role where I could have some effect, some positive effect, and we were all honored to do the work and to go. And it didn't bother me, and it was just a super heavy time.
Yeah. People in my high school were enlisting, and a bunch of guys from my class, as soon as they were old enough, went off into some pretty serious combat. And just before you and I started talking or interviewing, one of my friends from college, Alex Plitzis, who I think you've met, and his story there, and from ground zero on, like just 20 years where he was as a volunteer, just 20 years of complete life-changing event that really shaped our whole world. How did your family deal with this? I mean, it's got to be interesting coming up in the 20th anniversary at the same time your daughter's birthday, and how do you reflecting on this Saturday as you come forward?
Well, I mean, luckily for my kids, these are all just stories they hear, right? They were none of them. Obviously, my oldest was born the day before. She has no recollection of 9/11, and the others weren't even born yet. So. I do think it's different for people who were, adults or near adults at that point in time. We're the ones who remember 9/11 and all the feelings, and good and bad, man. I mean, it was a highly patriotic time. I remember that really well. I snuck away. So we were working like crazy. I'm a huge New England Patriots fan. Out of nowhere, my team makes the Super Bowl with this rookie quarterback, Tom Brady. And it was going to be in New Orleans. And I was like, I had made a pact years earlier with a buddy that we're going if the Patriots ever make the Super Bowl. So I snuck away from the White House during this period, which shows you a little bit of my shallowness, but I was the Patriots.
That's a patriotic duty to vote for America's team.
There's a patriotic point to the story, actually. So we go down to New Orleans. I actually had to lead an interagency meeting, all the agencies, state and DOD and this was pre-Homeland Security, so DOJ, the morning after the Super Bowl in DC, and all these people. It was a couple hundred people at this offsite event where we were going to figure out how the government can talk to each other better on these security issues and share intelligence better without having leaks and stuff. But no leaks, but still like find a way that people can be informed, because one of the things you learned pre 9/11 was like they weren't sharing information well, and then on the day of the event, there were all these problems on like the different agencies talking to each other and how we handled it. You need something like the Department of Transportation to close down the airways. You need like the other agencies doing different things at the same time. So there was this realization we needed a bunch of coordination. So anyway, I sneak off to the game with the plan of I'm getting in a car and driving all night after the game to the Atlanta airport so I can fly back to DC in time for this meeting. But what struck me during the game was the patriotism. So the halftime show is U2. Bono is known as kind of this anti-American kind of internationalist type. But during the show, they darkened the entire Superdome down in New Orleans, and they slowly scrolled the names of every person who was killed on 9/11 over the roof of the building. And anyone who was in that building, and I think a lot of people who watched it on TV, it was an emotional moment. It was just heavy. And then Bono is singing, and he opens his coat, and there's an American flag. And, if you like love America the way I do, and I know you do, it was just like, it shows you that moment. It was a different moment. Like, we're so divided today, and I'm not saying things are perfect then at all, but it brought the country together for a moment at least. And this surge of patriotism. So when I look back on it, that's kind of what I remember the most.
I remember that, watching that on television. My uncle was down there. I heard that it was difficult to get a room. I think he ended up sleeping on a pool table at a bar. But I remember watching that and how moving it was. And that seems to be a classic American thing. Like the first Bruins game we saw after COVID, when they were all packed in there and they were singing, the whole crowd took over and singing the Star Spangled Banner. Or the first Red Sox game after the Boston bombing, the marathon bombing, and seeing the "This is our country, this is our city, man" speech. They're very moving events that used to bring people together, and it's really disappointing. And I hope it changes where not even a baseball game, where you could go to the Washington Nationals and Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, illiberal, or apolitical, doesn't matter. You're all there to just watch baseball and America and the troops and maybe a flyover and some fireworks. That does seem to be under threat a little bit. But it was strong right after 9/11, extremely strong. American flags everywhere, American flag pins. The whole world was mourning with our country, and a lot of the world was preparing for war. It's looking back after 20 years, especially after this terribly managed retreat from Afghanistan, and the people who are still over there, Americans and American persons who are still over there, it's making a lot of people wonder if how that energy was used and where it was lost and where things started to go wrong. And you had for 8 years a front row view. Do you have any? I'm curious what's been going through your mind as you wonder that and people ask that.
Yeah, well, look, the anniversary of 9/11 plus this complete debacle in Afghanistan, I think you really have to try not to think very deeply if you're not sort of looking back on this period and wondering how we got off track. And look, my view is our country's broken and that all these things have contributed to it. And I think the move to go and depose the Taliban and to attack Al-Qaeda was like, you got to be a moron you got to either hate the country or be a total moron if you don't agree with that. Sorry, I'm pretty open to all kinds of arguments. I'm not open to the argument that like we shouldn't have done that. But everything that happened starting the first few months, and that only took a few months. Like we didn't get bin Laden in a few months, but we very much destroyed Al-Qaeda and all of their facilities and just obliterated the Taliban government. And again, like you remember the U.S. Special Operations soldiers on horses.
It's the first award the Daily Caller won for journalism, and it was new a few years later, was for this reporting on those horse soldiers.
Exactly.
It's incredible.
And those special operators going in on horseback, I just don't know anyone who wasn't filled with pride of our country seeing these guys do that. And so how did we dwindle all that away to be where we are today as a country is something I do spend a lot of time thinking about. And I do think first, look, I served in the Bush administration, but I've written about this. I think the sort of nation building concept in the Middle East was like so horribly flawed from the get-go. I mean, it's almost, if it wasn't so tragic, you would laugh. Like you're going to go into Afghanistan, this ancient society that you don't even understand, that's nowhere near, ready in an organic way for democracy, and just impose it from the outside and think that's going to work out. And now, and a lot of my good friends are just kind of passing over this whole debate and going straight to attacking Biden for the way he handled the withdrawal. But I think that's, I'm all for attacking Biden for the withdrawal. I can do it for an hour. I mean, it's the most, I don't even understand what they were thinking in the least, the way they handled that. So there's a lot to talk about. But I think if you served in the Bush years, you have an obligation to think about our role and what happened. And I do think, and not everyone agreed with all this at the time either, but if you're in administration, you're loyal and you're doing what the leaders decide. And I do believe in that kind of a system. So that was flawed. And that really drained a lot of the feeling that we just were talking about, the patriotic feeling, the coming together feeling, years and years of sending American kids over for a very undefined mission for a people that clearly are not up for what we're trying to impose, and doing that not just for a year or 2 years or 3 years, but for a full 20 years. Like, we shouldn't be so shocked that the whole country is like just in the state it's in right now, because that was a mess. There's a kind of an idea, or just a basic idea from the outside, that the administration was unified, and especially that your boss, the vice president, was a real leader in this. Was there what were the discussions like? Was there a lot of dissent for what you're able to go into? Were there voices of dissent in all the different offices, voices that were saying, this is the new mission, this is how we need to change it, and others saying, hold on a second, we went after Al-Qaeda, what is going on? Did places like Pakistan even come up really as possible real threats to the mission that we were dealing with, and what you're able to speak to? Yeah, so I guess the first part is like I'm not going to go and talk about private conversations with my old boss, because I feel like that would be disloyal, and I'm not doing that. But there's been a lot of public reporting on there were huge disagreements within the administration for sure, And yes, there was a focus on Pakistan. You're in a tough spot. Pakistan is an unreliable ally, but sort of an ally in a region where you don't have them, and for moving forces and for all kinds, and for intelligence and for all kinds of reasons, like there are reasons you have to work with Pakistan.
Yeah, if they close the passes, you're in trouble.
Yes. So, there was a lot of debate about all that for sure internally, but yeah, and by the way, Dick Cheney has, I probably got it from him. Like, he would never tell us about his private conversations with Bush. Like, he went into Bush, and you'd know kind of as a staffer what he wanted to talk about, because he might ask you to do some research or something, and he'd literally just bring in some handwritten notes. He'd have his talk. You would never know what happened afterwards. And he felt like that was his obligation to the president. He took all that seriously. I still believe in all that. I do believe that, like, our country elects a president. The president gets to make decisions. The rest of us are, advisors, and do our best, and, should speak your mind and privately, but we shouldn't be going out in public and second guessing the one guy who was elected. So that was the kind of system I worked under. I still believe in it.
Yeah, it was back then. I think maybe it was just a different phase of journalism. There were, in a different phase of partisanship, there were so few leaks, really major leaks, coming out of that administration, on that administration, that the few major ones where people came out and left and wrote a book for good reasons or bad reasons are memorable still. It's not like it stands in stark contrast to the administration, that last administration, Donald Trump's, where it seemed like it was every day somebody was coming out and speaking about internal conversations or leaking it. It was a totally different feel in Washington.
Yeah, all that stuff's gotten worse, I just think, every year. And yes, the Trump guys were leaking like crazy. Well, every administration has a lot of leakers, obviously. So I just happen to be one that wasn't. But they're like, it's a great way to get ahead. Journalists love you. You give them some good info, and you get a glowing style piece about how smart you are, and that's the trade-off. People do it all the time. Style, I guess, doesn't even exist. Does the style section even exist anymore? I don't know. That used to be the old system, right? The Washington Post, you like leak something to them, you give them enough stuff, and they do like this really glowing piece in their style section about how smart you are. And that was somebody. So
great way to catch the leakers.
Oh, well, the people in charge know. They know. And sometimes they're willing to do something about it, and sometimes they're not. But they usually know.
Yeah, there were some people you saw with the last administration who suddenly, they might have been a surrogate, somebody who was in the White House, somebody who was on television all the time, and then suddenly they might get moved to a different job, maybe to the campaign, and then you just wouldn't really hear from them again for quite some time. It's like, oh, they didn't want to fire that person, but they wanted to move on with them. It's interesting. I was interested in what you said about the partisanship, because that's been something that's been bugging me with the way that we've been reacting to the end of this war. There are so many people out there who Democrats who either don't want to talk about it because it's embarrassing to Joe Biden, or they want to blame Donald Trump and a treaty, even though it was the only treaty that the Biden administration seems to keep.
That's one of my favorites.
That's amazing, right? And then there are Republicans who are saying, who basically want to act like everything was good and no Americans have been killed for 18 months, and this is just Joe Biden's fault. And it seems like this went off the rails in the first year of the war. It was really codified as not just George W. Bush's war under Barack Obama, who then doubled down, and then the general seemed to lie to and obfuscate and hide things from President Trump. And there were some gains and then some losses, and then the treaty signed. And then the end was just disastrous. It's about as bipartisan of a disaster as I can think of as far as Washington goes, which I guess is how foreign policy disasters at least ought to be.
Well, certainly when they're 20 years long foreign policy disasters, I think that's right. And I doubt you and I agree on all of it. Like, I do think there's a value to having bases in places, for instance, like Afghanistan. I would have kept Bagram for sure. I've heard Trump say more recently that he would have too. I don't know if that was actually their plan or not. But, there's this sort of no forever war mantra now on the right with most of I have a lot of friends who buy that. You may be one of them. And I never understood exactly what it meant. In other words, I don't want forever wars. I think it was crazy that we had a 20-year war in Afghanistan. But when you're leaving, are you not going to keep the base there? Are you not going to keep like an easy place from which to kill terrorists? Because I want to do that. And so by the time we got to the end and there were only 2,000 guys there, and and actually the violence had gone way down, I don't think that was the worst outcome of a 20-year disaster. And I would have kept Bagram, and I would have kept enough guys to defend it, and I would have used it as a place to launch attacks on terrorists who are starting to build camps. I think that's in our national interest. That's nothing to do with like trying to set up some Jeffersonian democracy in Afghanistan. That's just pure American interest. So I would have been much more attracted to a plan like that. I think Trump now says that was his plan. Again, I don't know if it was, but
it didn't seem like it was his plan at the time.
Really seemed like it.
Not so much.
Honestly, I don't know. I haven't read it, but to me, like, there is an advantage to having U.S. troops around the world. Now we can debate how many. Do we have do we have too many in Korea now for forget 20 years, for 70 years? We should have that debate. But I think, and you're seeing this, other countries understand it, like forward force progression is important. China, apparently the new reporting, Reuters, I think, had a piece out yesterday that China is going to take over Bagram. Why do they want a forever war? No, they understand exerting power. So it'd be
interesting to watch China get involved. I mean, I think it's a little wild. We're all really terrified of China moving in there, and we should be, because they're actually a country that recognizes its own imperial power and its own imperial goals. So it'll just take the rare earth minerals and kill people. But that's how the British were when they went in there, and that's how the Russians were when they went in there, and it was not how the Americans were when they went in there. But the result was generally always the same. It didn't go great.
No, I agree. It didn't go great. I mean, we should have, when a place is called the graveyard of empires, you might want to think a little more deeply about like your.
What's that mean?
About your. It shows actually just the hubris that we have, that we think we can go in there, or thought we can go in there and as you said, it was on a bipartisan basis. Actually, if you look at some of the stuff George W. said and some of the stuff Barack Obama said about democracy in Afghanistan, it's virtually identical. And it was kind of a crazy idea from the start. So there's a lot of hubris thinking that we have the understanding, the capability, the power to just go impose that on a distant third world country that is known as the graveyard of empires. It's like, it's almost, again, it would be comical if it wasn't so sad.
And we saw a similar reaction to people who were saying we need to have U.S. forces topple Assad, and the reasoning for that was that the Russians were joining the theater in the Middle East. And I was kind of looking at that and thinking, if you want to put your hand into this blender that we've had our hand into for 20 years, I'm not exactly sure how Putin's going to come out with a different wound than we did. But sure, have at it. Join the Middle Eastern fray. I'm not sure why all these countries are trying to fill the vacuum of the power that we left behind, when we've shown, every country seems to have shown, that it's a very difficult place to maintain in any kind of way.
Yeah, no, look, I agree with that for sure. And a lot of this in the old days came down to energy. Like, we needed oil from the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, like we saw with the fracking, all the technology changes during fracking, we got to the point in the Trump administration where we were actually energy independent. Like, we could be energy independent, which was literally viewed as a pipe dream back in the Bush years. It was just viewed as a crazy impossibility. And the only pipe dream it was, and we had huge fights about this during that administration, was there were people in it who thought that we could be energy independent just by using ethanol, which, other of us thought was kind of wacky, because there's no signs that it's anywhere ready to take over our fuel, be our main supply of fuel. But fracking changed all that. The U.S. became energy independent, which I do think changes our calculus in the Middle East a lot, and also reduces Russia's power a lot. Now the Democrats are giving that all away.
It's wild to see.
Yeah, it's crazy. And so they're going to give that all away, which will make us dependent again on places like the Middle East to get our oil, which means we have a big strategic interest there.
Yeah, when you saw Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, writing letters basically begging OPEC for oil, you have to do a rewind and say, wait a second. When you came into office, we were energy efficient, self-sufficient.
We were net exporting.
Why do we need to start begging OPEC for oil? It's almost like there's a real need from some on the left to make this country more of a go along, get along part of the global community who's reliant on places like Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, look, I don't know if they think it through it that way and actually have a plan to do it, or if it's just
it's rare that people do have plans in DC.
Yeah, people don't usually have plans. It's usually just ineptness, and it's a combination of their wacky ideas and this is just the way it comes out. That's what I think it usually is. And it's certainly this time it's coming out in a really bizarre result where like we're giving up this huge strategic advantage that we had developed.
It seems like it's laying the groundwork, and especially with the hostage situation right now that we're facing as potentially happening in Afghanistan, laying the groundwork for the next. It doesn't seem like this chapter is quite closed yet. Do you think that there's more to come in Afghanistan, Iraq? I feel like in 20 years' time, we're not going to look back at this and say, "Wow, that was the last we saw of the Middle East and the Arab world and the Pashtun world and in Southern Asia."
Well, look, it would sure be awesome if that happened, but no, I don't expect it. And just look at the government that's taken over in Afghanistan, and these are like full-on terrorists that are keeping senior government positions. And I hear people say that maybe they don't want to mess with us anymore. They don't want us back there, so maybe they'll back off. Look, I would love it if that was the case. But this whole thing started because they came after us. And I just, I don't think this is over. I really hope it is. But I think the way Biden left Americans there and had no real plan to get them out from the get-go. He closed down the airport and pulled out the troops before the private citizens. So that is going to reverberate for a long time. Anything negative that happens to American citizens over there, green card holders over there, from this government that he allowed to take power and basically gave them security of the city, according to the reports, right? They offered us, you can take the city, which would have allowed us to get our guys out at least. He didn't want it. So anything that happens is on him. And is there stuff that's going to happen? Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine there's not. I hope not, but I can't imagine there wouldn't be.
It seems like it's getting pretty dangerous over there right now. How are you and your family, if you're doing anything, are you doing anything special or anything that on the 20th anniversary of September 11th? I know you've got your daughter's birthday coming up, but do you have any plans? Are you going to go to any of the events or turn on the television, or what's your day? What's your plan like?
I don't know, actually. So my kids aren't home, so we won't be with them. And I'm in Wyoming, and so there will be no events in where I live. And I don't really watch TV. So I guess the answer to all that is no. But look, I have it on my calendar every year, the time that the first plane hit the World Trade Center. And every year I stop and I just think about it. Because it was just a momentous event in our country's history. And because all those innocent Americans who went to work that day with no idea that, again, it was like the farthest thing from anyone's mind that this country in the heart of New York City, heart of Washington, D.C., and even more in a place like Shanksville, Pennsylvania, you don't wake up as an American expecting, I guess the last time was literally Pearl Harbor, right? And then at least there was a war going on, and there was some sense that the Japanese are getting a little fidgety with us. 9/11, it's just so out of the blue. So I do have that calendar reminder. Every year I think about it. Every year I just stop and I think about it. It makes me sad every year. So what we'll do, I don't know. On top of that, what we'll do, I'm sure I'll read a lot about it. I think there's a lot of stuff, like they redo all the TV reporting and all that. Maybe I'll watch some of that. I don't know.
It's hard to watch.
It's hard to watch, man. It's too sad.
Yeah, I don't like to watch it at all, but I'm glad that they do it so that other people, especially those who weren't born yet or were one day old or weren't born for another 10 years can get an idea of or what that country went through when they look back and say, why did you go to war in Afghanistan? They can say, well, this is why it started. We didn't start that war. Someone else did.
And there's ancillary issues at a time when a huge swath of the left, and it's accepted by a bunch of America, is anti-police and anti-first responder and stuff. You remember the heroism of those. Everyone was wearing New York fire hats and NYPD hats and walking up to cops and just thanking them for their service. Not just the military guys, because of the heroism we saw that day. Guys running up the stairs. So it's important to remember all that at a time when our country is just losing all that.
It was heartbreaking. There's a whole feeling in that country, that whole Noam Chomsky idea that America is the only source of evil, that there isn't evil outside of there. It's just people reacting to us. And to go down there, I was down in the World Trade Center in early December, and when the buildings, all the glass was still shattered, everything was still covered in dust. The hole was still smoking. The last wall that would look like a cathedral came down that day. And I walked through the north, Little Italy, and I walked through the Italian sections of town, especially, but all over. And the "Have you seen me?" signs. Have you seen this person? Have you seen this person? Missing, missing, missing. Wives, husbands, children, police officers, firemen. Made you realize that all this stuff is wrong. That there is something out there, and they haven't gone away. And we need they'll be there. There'll be a time when we're threatened again. Neil, where can people find more of your writings and your columns and podcasts from that huge staff and all the original reporting that you guys put out?
Yeah, man. Thank you for that plug. We dailycaller.com, www.dailycaller.com has it all. I have been posting a column around once a week or so. It gets syndicated, but it starts at the Daily Caller. And we have, as you guys do at the Federalist, one of the things that's happening in America is like the sort of these established and generally more liberal, huge corporate news behemoths are like increasingly just so out of touch that people are looking for new places. And we're one of them, and the Federalist is one of them. And we have all these new shows we're doing. I'm super proud of our show, Vince and Jason.
It's great.
Save the Nation, which if I'm going to plug anything, I'll plug that. Vince Colonnais is a friend of yours and a friend of mine. One of the smartest guys I've ever met. Been at the Daily Caller for a long time, and also a DC morning radio host. Super conservative. And his friend is Jason Nichols, who's a Black Studies professor at the University of Maryland and is super liberal. They don't agree on a lot at all, but they are friends and they agree to debate, which is something that I just think we're all in our bubbles in America right now. And it's one of the reasons we can't make progress on anything. No one's talking to each other. So we're working hard to solve that. Vince and Jason Save the Nation is our premier show to try to do that. And I would love people to check that out, because honestly, anyone I've asked to watch that show, and it's on video on YouTube, or you can get it on any of the podcast platforms in the audio version. Anyone I've asked to just check out the show and tell me what you think. They're like, holy shit, that's something like I haven't seen that before. This is amazing. The last guest we had on there was like, I've never been on an interview like this where we're having this kind of a real discussion about a topic like race. They were talking about race. Like no one like one of the reasons that we're falling apart is like these topics are just too sensitive. There's too much deplatforming. Everyone's just retreated to their own bubble. And so we're trying to sort of pop that a little bit. Vince and Jason is our show that's doing that. So check that out more before you even check out your column, which you should too.
It's a fantastic show. Vince was my first supervisor when I started the Daily Caller in 2010. Spent 10 fantastic years there working with you and Tucker. Well, awesome. Neil, thanks for joining us today. This has been a really interesting conversation.
Love it, Bedford. Love to join you anytime, man. You take care.
I'm Chris Bedford at the Federalist, joined by Neil Patel, publisher of the Daily Caller and head of the Daily Caller News Foundation. Until next time, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.